Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust you had a good weekend. I certainly had a busy one. I participated yesterday in an inside story on Al Jazeera around the story headline is "Can Africa Curb Illicit Cash Flow? Continent-wide problem results in over $1 trillion siphoned off since 1980. This is research from the African Development Bank. The story is that African leaders have been meeting in Bahia Dar in Ethiopia to find a way to stop vast sums of money from illegally being taken out of Africa. Cash outflow is the result of many factors, including poor financial regulatory frameworks, weak and non-harmonized tax regimes, opaque public procurement and contracting. Criminal networks are also to blame. The presenter was Hazem Sika. The links on Rich Wrap-Ups if you're going to have a look at it. The number is incontestable, but there are many different layers to that number. Of course, multinational transfer pricing, but you've also got political campaign-related financing. You've got a bunch of other vectors. You've got the poaching. You've got the drugs. I mean, that shipment they found off the coast, the Australians interdicted, and I'll come to it again, but look at the value that was put on that one single haul of $300 million, which is bigger than any FDI in the last 3 years. I can guarantee you that. So you can see there's exponential capital formation in those sorts of businesses. I'd like to thank His Excellency Juice Rentjes for the invitation on Friday to celebrate the Netherlands King's Day. Really was a great function. Lots of good people. Enjoyed myself thoroughly. I took a photograph from behind him. And then I'd like to thank His Excellency the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's ambassador to Kenya for a lovely dinner on Saturday. I'll put up a photograph of him. He's rather mercurial and a good chap. And then I was thinking of putting up a food dish because I'd been feeling hungry, and I remembered the seaweed salad I had at Zuma in Dubai. Rather fancy price as well. And finally, on that visit, we visited the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, which has this lovely cafe at the back, and I'll put up a photograph of it because it's very beautiful as well. Did Obama just draw another red line in the East China Sea? This is referencing Tokyo. The president made another powerful promise, assuring Japan that the disputed Senkakus Islands come under Article 5 of the US-Japan Security Treaty, and thus would be protected by American forces in the case of a Sino-Japanese conflict over them. In response, the Chinese accused Washington of trying to cage China. Perhaps President Obama's threats are simply seen as no longer credible. Beijing may well decide that the president offers little but rhetoric. In that case, it is not a question of whether the United States has the means to deter Chinese aggression. We do for now. But whether President Obama has the will. If the leaders of revisionist or disruptive states are betting that the White House will shy away from any real confrontation, then they will embrace aggressive opportunism when the chance offers itself. In the case of China and Japan, this is an article in the Daily Beast, that could lead to the largest clash in Asia since Vietnam. The two have no relations of trust, and the trend line has shown that they are unwilling to solve their dispute peacefully. The worst outcome would be if President Obama's promise actually worsened the situation in the East China Sea rather than stabilize it. That would truly test US resolve and credibility. And I said the answer to the question you posed is yes. President Barack Obama drew a red line, and in a manner as incontestable as flying two B-52s directly into the ADIZ at the end of last year. The comparison between the Syrian red line and the Senkakus is kind of spurious. Erdogan's fingerprints were all over the trigger event in Syria. and to advocate intervening on such a compromised pretext was a cockamamie idea. I am surprised that the US is pivoting in two directions simultaneously, i.e. both to Ukraine, Russia, and to Asia, China. Nevertheless, one senses that the US security complex senses it has a decisive advantage now and that this is set to erode. The nature of advantages is you need to press them. And I've concluded by saying, the president has been a sophisticated and aggressive exponent of a new kind of 21st century warcraft. The weak Barack Obama canard. He's cute, but it's a nonsense. Put up a photograph of the president arriving at the Onsan Air Base, and then another photograph of Air Force One. Putin apparently has halted all talks with the White House. This is another report on the Daily Beast. Since the invasion of Crimea, Putin and President Obama have had regular phone calls and an often half-hearted attempt to de-escalate the ongoing crisis inside Ukraine. But as the US and EU prepare to unveil new sanctions against Russia, Putin has decided the interactions should stop. The Kremlin has ended high-level contact with the Obama administration, according to diplomatic officials and sources close to the Russian leadership. The move signals an end to the diplomacy for now. Putin will not talk to Obama under pressure, said Igor Yurgens, chairman of the Institute for Contemporary Development, a prominent Moscow think tank and a close associate of Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. It does not mean forever. And then Kerry said, it then turns out that Chuck Hagel is also getting the cold shoulder from his Russian counterpart Sergei Shoigu. Pentagon officials have reached out to Russia on Mr. Hagel's behalf, not gotten any response. But the only people talking to each other seem to be Kerry and Sergei Lavrov. Kerry lashed out, saying, instead in plain sight, Russia continues to fund, coordinate and fuel a heavily armed separatist movement in Donetsk. Lavrov publicly responded, the US is trying to pervert everything that is going on in Ukraine. On Friday, Kerry summed up his recent interactions with his Russian counterpart. I've had 6 conversations with Lavrov in the last few weeks. The last one was Kafkaesque. It was bizarre. So a complete breakdown in communications over there. Kerry made some pretty outspoken comments that Israel risks becoming an apartheid state. The US government tends to be very careful about the language it uses, and that signals an interesting linguistic response to the breakdown in the Palestinian-Israeli discussions. Then I'm jumping to the book I'm reading at the moment, which I told you about, The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. The terrorist and the policeman both come from the same basket. Revolution, legality, counter moves in the same game, forms of idleness at bottom identical. I am afraid that if you want to go down into history, you'll have to do something for it. Put up a photograph of an Apache helicopter flying over Tahrir Square during a protest to support the army in Cairo, July 16, 2013. After 52 days, it's highly unlikely that any debris will be found on the surface of the Indian Ocean. This is the Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, and I reckon that's because it's not there and somewhere else. Then I came across a number of 2 interesting articles. One was The Hunt for El Chapo, and this is the story. I'll just read you the first paragraph. One afternoon last December, an assassin on board a KLM flight from Mexico City arrived at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport. This was not a business trip. The killer, who was 33, liked to travel and often documented his journey around Europe on Instagram. He wore designer clothes and a heavy silver ring in the shape of a grimacing skull. His passport was an expensive fake, and he had used it successfully many times. But moments after he presented his documents to Dutch customs, he was arrested. The US Drug Enforcement Administration had filed a red notice with Interpol, an international arrest warrant, and knew that he was coming. Only after the Dutch authorities had the man in custody did they learn his real identity, Jose Rodrigo Arechiga, the chief enforcer for the biggest drug trafficking organization in history, Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. And a very interesting article, and from there obviously they got hold of El Chapo apparently. Interesting piece by Arif Nakvi of the Abraj group saying cities, not countries, are the key to tomorrow's economies. Each passing week provides a million new reasons to rethink the view that countries are the fundamental building blocks of civilization in the 21st century. For that is the number of people who make the journey from country to city every 7 days, exchanging rural for urban life with no intention of going back. Saying that is the equivalent to populating 8 cities the size of New York every year. This shift means that nearly half of the economic growth expected over the next decade will take place in just 400 cities in the world's global growth markets. It will create an urban consumer class of 4 billion people by 2025, up from 1 billion as recently as 1990. These are large numbers. Very interesting piece. And I wrote about this, I think it was an E&Y report, which said, a key trait of 21st century success, they called it global fluency, and I was saying, global fluency is a level of global understanding, competence, practice, reach a metropolitan area exhibits in an increasingly interconnected world economy. And I was saying then that both Dubai and Geneva, which I had visited at that time, are globally fluent. Currency markets, euro, popping a little bit higher, 138.37 when I checked last. Trades resilient in the teeth of a lot of jaw from Mario Draghi, who's trying to keep a lid on it. Dollar index 79.80, no vigor behind the move. Japanese yen 102.16, little bit firmer last week off the back of concerns about Ukraine. Swiss franc 0.8820, the pound 167.90. And it touched 168.42 on April 17, which was the highest level since November 2009. It's not far off it. I'm looking for 173.50. Aussie 0.9278, Indian rupee 60.66. I'm looking for about 57.50 post a compelling Narendra Modi victory at the polls. South Korean won 1036.95, strengthened 0.3%. And it's up 2.6% this month, the most among all the Asian currencies. Rial 224.07 fell the most this year. Central bank refrained from calling an auction to roll over foreign exchange swaps. Declined 1.3% at the close of trade on Friday. That was the biggest drop since December 11. Egyptian pound 699.94, just below 7. South African rand 1065.58. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. The Fed meets April 29, April 30, and everyone expects them to cut back purchases by another 10 billion, and then to be done with it by the 28th, 29th meeting in October. But the dollar trades very flat, but you'll see it's also got this triangle formation. Typically that's presages a break, and on balance I would have thought that with the US economy firming, the likelihood is that the break will be higher. But at the moment it doesn't seem to have any impetus. Euro-dollar trades very resiliently in the face of a lot of talk from Draghi trying to keep a cap on it. Gold popped back over 1300, 1304.175, all about Ukraine, I think, in geopolitical risk. And it will actually mean that the gold will post a rally this month of 1.7%. It dropped 3.2% in March, but I, for one, do not see it running away to the top side. It's up 8.7% this year. Dropped 28% last year. Crude oil 101.01 fell on Bloomberg, saying prices are going higher this week because of pressures linked to the situation around Russia and Ukraine. I, for one, think that it's a little bit toppy above 100 in the long term. Coffee, I'll put up a 1-year chart. It really has had a blistering rally this year. Dubai's stock market is up 52% this year, making it the best performer among more than 90 measures tracked globally by Bloomberg. Up on that net, I'll put up a photograph of the Burj Khalifa. The Indian rupee, I'll put up a 1-year chart of that, and just mention that I think that could get as high as 57.50. Sub-Saharan African markets, I wrote a piece over the weekend. The headline that the Star chose was Rising Fiscal Imbalances, Region's Achilles Heel. And I said last Thursday I attended the release of the IMF's 2014 Sub-Saharan Africa Regional Economic Outlook at the Serena Hotel. The Armani room reminded me of my days on the trading floor. Antoinette Saye, head of the IMF Africa Department, Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury, Henry Rotich, Dario Tugay of the World Bank, the always sprightly and probably in his 90s now, Manu Chandaria, plus plenty of others. Worthies were in the audience. It's a big-ticket event and an important release. Africa, in my view, is the least linear of continents. Directionally, the continent is on the upswing, and the IMF's projected SSA GDP they're projecting GDP will expand to 5.5% this year from 4.9% in 2013, and GDP growth is the condition precedent of the Africa Rising story. However, you have to admit there's always a lot of zigzag. The IMF's REO gives us a bird's eye view. Too often I find we get entrenched in the reality of our own situation. The economic outlook gives us a chance to take a look at the bigger African canvas. The IMF cautioned that this solid near-term outlook is nonetheless subject to downside risks. External factors pose by far the more potent threats to the region as a whole, but domestic risks are more significant in some countries. The risks the IMF outlined were that growth in emerging markets could prove less supportive, and it's worth noting that 1/3 of non-oil exports of the region now go to the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, compared with less than 10% a decade ago. So that channel is now a much bigger one than it ever was. They're referencing tighter global financial conditions, and this has already impacted African sovereign yields, with Zambia and Ghana Eurobond yields now approaching 9%. Thirdly, they're talking about rising fiscal imbalances in some countries, and this for me remains the Achilles heel. The IMF said in a few cases policy missteps such as large fiscal imbalances threaten to undermine the hard-won macroeconomic gains of recent years that have supported growth. In addition, important homegrown risks from fiscal vulnerabilities in a number of countries such as Ghana and Zambia. I mentioned those previously. Ghana's Cedi has been in free fall, and the Zambian kwacha not far behind. The price the markets are exacting for policy missteps is brutal. Then the IMF was referencing security conditions, saying they remain difficult in some areas, threatening spillover effects. And the IMF is focused on the dreadful situation in South Sudan and in the CAR, but I would also raise the red flag around the risks posed by the likes of Al-Shabaab and the Boko Haram, whose leader Abu Bakr Sheikhout taunted President Goodluck Jonathan with the comment, "I am in your city." The main downside risk to this generally positive baseline scenario is the risk that growth in emerging markets might slow much more abruptly than currently envisaged. My takeaway is the tailwinds remain favorable, but that the markets are no longer as benign, that we would be wise to look very closely how policymakers are getting crunched in places like Ghana. A more than 30% collapse in a currency is a direct cause and effect of poor policymaking. Putting Humpty Dumpty together again is not an easy thing. I'll put up a photograph that I took when I attended that release, as I was describing in that piece. South Africans marked the 20th anniversary of the end of white minority rule today. 1994 ushered in a new era of hope for all South Africans, a hope that the lives of the people would improve and that South Africa would be a better country than it had ever been. President Jacob Zuma said in a speech at the Union Building in Pretoria, "Our freedom was not free. It came about through blood, sweat and tears. That is why we must defend it at all cost." He, of course, has become a lightning rod for discontent. The proportion of the 53 million people living below the extreme poverty line of 290 rand a month fell to 31.3% last year, from 41.1% in 1994. For 20 years, millions of South Africans have been able to lead their lives and pursue their dreams in conditions of relative peace, personal dignity and harmony. This is F.W. de Klerk. Despite all our challenges, South Africa is a much better and fairer country today than it was before 27th April 1994. Gracious Domit. And I congratulate South Africa on reaching the grand old age of 20, and I'm going to put up my favourite photograph of Nelson Mandela having a dance. Doesn't he look happy? However, bad news, violence erupted on South Africa's Platinum Belt on Sunday when members of the striking AMCU union attacked the sports minister Fikile Mbalula as he campaigned in the area for the ruling ANC in May 7 elections. He was whisked away in a bulletproof car when AMCU members set upon him and ANC activists pelting them with rocks as they went door to door in Freedom Park, a shanty town northwest of Johannesburg. There was a group of about 100 guys with AMCU shirts. We had to run for our lives. The US Secretary of State John Kerry will travel to Ethiopia, the DRC, and Angola from April 29 through May 5 to promote democracy and human rights, the State Department said on Friday. Trade between China and Africa has increased 5.6% this year over year to hit $201 billion in 2013. That looks quite static versus 2012. On Wednesday, Standard Chartered told Chinese and African officials that they expect China-Africa trade volume to hit $280 billion by 2015. This is an interesting comment. Too much of Africa's recent prosperity depends on China's own continued prosperity and rapid growth. If China goes, so goes Africa, he added. With world watching Ukraine, Russia makes energy moves in Africa. Quite an interesting story there. That's on Rich Wrap-Ups if you want to have a look at that. South African oil share just below an all-time high. It's up 7.23% this year. MTN said yesterday data revenue rose 43% in the first quarter from a year earlier. And that data story, it's sort of parabolic increase in data consumption, is happening pretty much all over the continent. Dollar versus rand, 1065 area. I'll put up a 3-month chart. I still remain of the view we're going to 10 rather than 11. Egyptian pound just below 7. The Egyptian stock market is Africa's best in 2014. It's up 22.85% this year. The Nigeria all shares down 3.25% this year, but it's up 4.744% since March 19. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index up 6.41%, but all your positive returns have been shot down. SETI's free fall. The index has fallen 6.685% since February 21st. Let me put up a photograph of Pope Francis meeting the Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe and his wife at the Vatican. Another photograph I found of the Somaliland Coast Guard on patrol in the Gulf of Aden. And a photograph via at Ethiopia Forward. The 6-lane Adama-Addis Expressway will be open for traffic very soon. The Australian Navy seized $290 million worth of heroin from a boat off Kenya's coast. The Navy estimates the street value of the heroin at $219 million. Crew from HMAS Darwin boarded the wooden boat east of Kenya, discovered 46 sacks of heroin hidden among bags of cement. The Navy says the drugs from the dhow were taken aboard HMAS Darwin. These drugs have now been seized and destroyed. My conclusions are $290 million on one dhow informs us of the exponential nature of capital formation in this business, and then informs us of how dangerous and inexpensive it is for the folks to hijack key points within the state. I'll put up a photograph of HMAS Darwin. And my dear friend, the Australian High Commission in Nairobi was on Sunday summoned over the seizure of this heroin haul off the Kenyan coast. The meeting between Foreign Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohammed and Mr. Jeff Tooth took place as Kenyan authorities maintained that they had been kept in the dark regarding the shipment. That's why they were rather clever to destroy it at once. Then from there I jumped to a TwitPic I put up some time ago that the President tweeted when he was visited by Dr. Christian Turner, Bob Godek, David Angel and Jeff Tooth, and was assured of their commitment to support my government in eliminating terror threats in the country. And the article I referred to on Friday, the link is here again on today's wrap-ups from Foreign Affairs. This quote I'm going to read to you. President Uhuru Kenyatta formally asked Washington for help in monitoring and securing its border with Somalia, and US Ambassador to Kenya Robert Godek confirmed the indefinite deployment of FBI agents to Kenya to assist in terrorism-related matters. So quite a lot of interesting developments on that front. MasterCard has bagged equity in KCB in a plastic money duel with Visa, and given that both constitute 52.4% of total deposit accounts. Puts MasterCard in the driving seat, I would have thought. The Kenya shilling is at 86.82. Nairobi all share closed at a record every day last week, and it's up 10.106% this year. The NSE 20 flipped into positive territory finally for the year. It's up 0.605%. I'll just read you what I wrote on Friday. The African equity indices have been in a broad-based upswing in April, with the Nigeria all-share up over 5% since the middle of March. South African all-share setting all-time highs. Egypt, the best-performing African index in 2014. I was referring to the IMF saying Ghana and Zambia is particularly vulnerable to the changing international environments. I think you've got to be differentiating this year, which is you didn't have to do previously. I was just saying the all shares rallied sharply in April. Big caps like Safaricom were just plus 20.27% this year. EABL plus 11.32% in April. Banks, Co-op and CFC both at records. KCB within 0.5% of a record. Equity Bank plus 14.173% in April. And the insurance segment had been the shares that have been hard charging the index so far in 2014. Once again, thanks for stopping by.